data for cancer research. So these are my, fellow compatriots who help with me and work with me. So, yeah, I, just gave my titles. So I supervise 3 software developers that maintain LCC's CTMS notice and case report form system, Fong Lin, Anil Burka, and Ruben Fernandez. I supervise 2 research analysts that are embedded within NM Research Analytics and delivering clinical cancer data to cancer researchers pulled from the NM EDW, Neelima Katam and Giorgio DeSalvo. I review all pull requests for cancer-relevant analytic outputs produced by NM Research Analytics. There are some different power users that are embedded within some of the departments like urology and the central nervous system, and those people also make cancer-relevant requests that we try to take a look at all of them that are coming through. I provide business requirements and high-level designs to a team of EDW research data architects who organize operational data sources into easily queryable data structures and data marts. So Bhadrappa, Prasant, and Kevin, and I supervise 2 research analysts. It's the 2 same people who do the EDW pull, so I wish there were 2 different people, but who support cancer-relevant REDCap projects, instrument design, survey setup, e-consent, maintenance, and integration with Notice and the EDW. Talking a little about some of the other stuff we do, we support clinical trials, and that's a big part of what we do, obviously. So my team works with the clinical trials office, the disease teams, the PRMS, research compliance and integrity, and the other members of QDIS, the statisticians and the bioinformatics, to assist cancer researchers that conduct clinical trials at Northwestern. So that's opening studies, registering patients on clinical trials, manage and enter case report forms and adverse events, and analyze trial data and report on accruals across the catchment area. But I'm not mostly talking about that today. I'm mostly talking about actually retrieving data from the EDW and how to use it. So modern clinical care is administered using EHRs, which we all know. Clinical informatics is the organization and delivery of clinical data that has been collected in EHRs and other ancillary systems during the clinical care of patients. So more recently, my team has taken on the responsibility of finding, organizing, and delivering clinical data for cancer research. As of the last quarter of 2023, all requests submitted to the EDW by LCC members are now assigned to a dedicated research cancer informatics analyst, Neelima, Giorgio, or myself. Formerly, LCC members would be assigned a research analyst from like a general pool of analysts in NM Research Analytics, and LCC members were formerly billed by the hour for research analyst time. Now research analyst time is free for all LCC members, constrained by how often we can get things finished. So our vision is that cancer data requires deep domain knowledge, and that analysts specializing in cancer informatics will produce higher quality outputs at a quicker pace. My team is developing best practice standards and code templates to converge on more standardized and repeatable outputs. And we're reviewing all cancer-relevant analytic outputs from research analytics, and that has enabled us to identify repeated patterns across cohorts and research requests. And those patterns then have been basically submitted to the research data architects to extract into patterns into reusable data structures. So we currently have 50% of an EDW data architect, research data architect. We want to expand that. We've asked for 100%, and hopefully in the next year that'll happen, because the more that we can make stuff already easy to query, the better it'll be to get out and not as complicated. So just to say that this is a work in progress. We're a newer team to get, we basically took on this responsibility, not in the too distant past. So we're, trying to grow and mature our operations to do a better job. But our real goal is to basically make it not as boutique as it has been to get cancer data out of the EDW in the past, and try to make it more standardized and much simpler. So just a little bit of an outline. So it's not a technical talk. There's no SQL examples or NLP or LLMs. This is conceptual description of challenges about collecting data, background on that, finding and organizing and delivering data, detail on the unique challenge of finding, organizing and delivering data, a specific use case, and then talk about we've been developing some REDCap cancer site-specific project templates, And then also talk about a current inventory of the data assets in the EDW relevant to cancer research, and talk about like a little bit of an estimation of where they're at, and then some future directions and a call for collaboration. So to talk about collecting, so there's multiple points of collection. There's collecting for at the point of care in EHRs. It's collecting data for payment claims, and collecting data to fulfill quality surveillance and regulatory mandates, most prominently for cancer tumor registries. So EHR data makes up the vast majority of the data used by clinical informatics in our day-to-day projects. So collecting. Why not just query the EHR data? It's electronic. It must all be there. So isn't that enough? Amazon uses electronic computer systems to manage the marketing and order and fulfillment of products. Amazon has great data. Doesn't a world-class healthcare institution like NM, have great analytics on their data? And one of the big problems with healthcare is that about 80%. I don't know if this is really true as much as it was in the past, but it's a high number. Basically, about 8% of the data in the medical record is unstructured, so which makes it much more challenging to use. So, so the delivery of healthcare requires a voluminous amount of data. That has to be collected at multiple intervals. And it basically poses fundamental challenges to making data in the EHR analyzable. So some of these things are urgency. Basically it's very urgent that we have to get on to the next action, to the next patient. The people who are entering the data are very highly skilled and have high costs. So it basically, those people who are those doctors and providers, you can't always basically, spend all that time to collect data because like they can for clinical research trials. It's decentralized. The delivery of healthcare, is not always in one place. The full history of a patient's medical record is not always present within one institution. Somebody can have a surgery at one place, then come back to Northwestern for a radiation and chemotherapy, or vice versa. There is care everywhere, and we're starting to figure out how to query that, and it's making things a little bit better. Healthcare has proprietary systems that don't necessarily exchange information very well. Again, that's improving with Care Everywhere and some other advancements. And then the interface, obviously, of EHRs is something that everybody likes to complain about. So those challenges of collecting data create challenges in basically organizing and delivering data for research. So a little bit of general about the EDW. The EDW is a giant database where a copy of NM's Epic instance is loaded daily. There's a bunch of other ancillary systems that are loaded alongside it. Neuralframe, which is a tumor registry vendor, radiation oncology, EMR, Mosaic, clinical trials management system, Notice and Study Tracker, legacy EHR instances, Cerner, and there's a lot more in there. So the native copies of the source systems in the EDW are called ODSs, and the EDW has created some integrated data structures on top of those to hopefully make it a little bit easier to query the data from those operational systems, and with some better or worse current state. A little bit talking about the IRB, data stored approval, and HIPAA. So to receive clinical data from the EDW, a requester needs to have an approved IRB project or IRB determination of non-subject human research. The IRB project and the determination templates that can be retrieved from the Northwestern IRB, and definitely encourage people to use those as much as possible. When specifying the data points necessary for an IRB project, you should avoid using generalized language like all medical history and all comorbidities. There's some specific mental health rules in Illinois that make it very, you have to filter out those things. So when you include that kind of language in your IRB, you're going to get denied by the data steward. So also and this is not something that's widely known, and it's kind of like a bad, I think, workflow that's bad on the Cancer Center, needs to be improved. All cancer relevant IRB projects should be submitted to the LCC protocol review and monitoring system, and to be uploaded and uploaded into Notice. You have to email this email address for guidance, and every IRB project that's cancer relevant, not necessarily that it's a clinical trial, has to be approved by the scientific review committee. So, and it'll help downstream. It might be annoying, but it'll help downstream for integrating different systems, REDCap and Notice, and it'll make it easier to create cohorts in the EDW. So a research request to QDisc, which is the Quantitative Data Science Core, which is the core I'm talking about today. And we're basically, didn't really say that, but basically we're the clinical informatics part of QDisc. So basically QDisc is bioinformatics folks, statisticians, and also clinical informatics folks. And we're the clinical informatics folks. So we're basically the people who get the data to hand it off to the statisticians who then analyze the data. So, but there's two ways to make a clinical informatics request to QDisc. One is basically to go to this QDisc tracker, which is linked from our website. That's a REDCap project. And then another way is to just go directly to the IRB, go to the EDW portal and submit a request there. And as long as you're an LCC investigator, it'll get it assigned to us to work on. We're also taking on cancer requests from non-LCC investigators, but we don't like to broadcast that. So requests for feasibility do not require an IRB or determination. The NM data steward will review the request, verifying that the cohort and the data points requested are covered by the requester's IRB approved project and determination. And if approved, a QDisc research analyst will be assigned to fill the request. So depending on the needs of the project and its IRB approval, a project will receive either identified, de-identified, or a limited data set. And for human subject research, anyone receiving the data must be on the APL of the IRB project. All right, so now talking a little bit actually about data and not about like the steps to get data. So basically, an EDW clinical informatics request is basically comprised of two major components, basically a cohort definition and then a list of data points that you want for them. So patients with a record of consent and there's normally two different kinds of cohort definitions. One's basically based on consent. So patients that are in a particular study and have been consented to the study, whether it's a biorepository study or whether it's actually a clinical trial, or clinical inclusion criteria if you have a HIPAA waiver of authorization that's based on clinical criteria. So basically a clinical phenotype or a clinical case definition where you're trying to identify patients based on things like diagnosis codes, procedure codes, medications, and lab values. And then once you've had your cohort, then you want to get a list of data points for that cohort. And so then basically you specify that you want those specific diagnosis codes and procedure codes and medications and laboratory values and other things for that cohort of patients. So diving into a specific example that we had worked on recently that will highlight some of the challenges is we had just an example of a breast cancer request. So basically the group that's preparing a breast spore, they wanted to identify certain patients who had triple negative breast cancer and that had a biopsy and a surgery collected at NM. And they want to do this because they want to be able to make a request to the clinical specimen release committee and from the clinical specimen archive. So I'm not sure if everybody knows about it, but basically you can request specimens from the clinical specimen archive to be used for research purposes. And in order to do that, basically we have to give the accession numbers to PathCore, and then PathCore makes the request on behalf of the investigator, and then a request has to be made also by the investigator to the release committee. But in this case, that's what we're trying to do. Is trying to identify specific pathology cases to be released. And then they also wanted to have neoadjuvant immunotherapy between the biopsy and the surgery. And then this is the list of data points that are being requested: demographic, race, ethnicity, gender, initial diagnosis date, surgery date, pathological findings from the surgery, metastasis date and site of metastasis, radiation therapy treatment, systemic regimens, all genetic variants identified by NGS testing, last follow-up date, and death date. So yeah, just to go into a little bit about the challenges and how we met them. So basically, to find triple negative breast cancer patients with a biopsy and a surgery collected in NM, we have to first determine a good source of pathology case and pathology case findings, site, histology, HER2 status, PR status, and ER status. And if possible, we want to try to use it to discretely capture data and not necessarily have to dive into that 80%. The solution for this was we use there's a pathology data mart in the EDW that aggregates legacy Cerner and Epic Beacon pathology cases into one structure, so it makes it easy to to query. And we've added different features on top of it to be able to normalize the pathology cases and the pathology case sections to make it so that it's easier to query it across time, across the different variants of pathology that have happened over time. And then we use the pathology extension to the pathology, the pathology finding extension to the pathology data mart that contains discrete synoptic data that was directly associated to pathology cases post 2021. So in 2021, a great event happened for informatics was that basically the pathologists started using synoptic pathology for like a subset of the cases. Right now, it's mostly it's on resections, not on biopsies, and it's mostly on solid tumors, but things are growing and getting better all the time. And what makes it great is that now this is extremely easy to query. Basically, we just have a finding table that hangs off of our pathology case table. We get the codes for these different statuses, and then we find triple-negative breast cancer patients. Pre-2021, it's not as simple because we don't have retrospective and updated pathology for like all historical NM pathology cases, which we definitely should have. And it's something that I'm personally trying to get done here. But so right now, currently, we have to resort to NACER in the tumor registry. And the tumor registry is great. Basically, if people know basically what a tumor registry is, there are certain mandates that you have to report every cancer patient to different government or different institutions. And then there's chart abstractors and a great group of people here at Northwestern Medicine who basically carefully abstract all that data into a tumor registry system called NeuralFrame. And that data has been loaded in EDW and is available for querying. So in this case, what we do, and it has triple-negative breast cancer status for patients, is we basically find those codes that for NACER, which is called the North American Association of Central Cancer Registries. I think that's what it stands for. We find the codes for this particular cohort, and then we query them. In this case, the findings of triple negative are not directly associated with the pathology case. The tumor registry only basically does a diagnosis date, initial diagnosis date, and then a first course treatment date of surgery, chemotherapy, immunotherapy, and so in this case, we're having to match on from our pathology data mart to our tumor registry for patients who are triple negative and hope that we basically find the dates matching between our tumor registry and our pathology data mart. So the data is not as clean pre-2021 as it is afterwards. So. Next challenge is distinguishing breast biopsy pathology procedures from non-biopsy pathology procedures that collect breast specimens. So we can easily distinguish breast surgical pathology from, for example, gyne surgical pathology, because we can look at the associated specimens. There's basically, in the pathology data mart, there's a specimens table that hangs off of the pathology case table, and that represents the different specimens that were collected on the pathology case. And so it's easy to basically, at the level of the pathology case, it's just an order for surgical pathology. So, but if you want to be able to distinguish between the two different kinds, you look at the specimens, and that'll tell you that, oh, this is a breast surgical versus a gyne surgical pathology. So unfortunately, the orders for surgical pathology do not distinguish its purpose, whether it's a biopsy versus other kinds of, breast interventions. So in order to identify, but we want to identify breast biopsies to provide an index date for the new adjuvant chemotherapy, and also because we actually want to get the accession numbers of the biopsies to request to the clinical specimen release committee. So in this case, our solution was we used CPT-4, which is a standardized procedure vocabulary that is published by the American Medical Association and is present in the EDW surgery data mart. And there's also a coded procedure data mart, which is basically the billing codes that have been billed for the services that have been provided by the surgeries that have occurred both on the hospital side and on the physician side. One of the problems, though, is CPT is flawed. It's billing focused. It's clinically imprecise. It's gross. Has some pretty gross ambiguities, and has this sometimes where it says either this or this happened, and you don't necessarily know exactly what happened. So in this case, we do a multi-pass logic where we basically look at the associated synoptic reports, which clearly tell us that it's either a biopsy or a section. Then we look at the associated CPT codes, And we also then apply regular expressions at the end to the actual text of the pathology report to finally distinguish them. And across all those things, we get some pretty good results. Next challenge was finding immunotherapy drugs administered between biopsy and surgery. So first thing we want to do is identify all immunotherapy drugs approved or previously approved for triple negative breast cancer, which is actually not that many. So in this case, it's not as impressive that we go to this resource. And then we want to find all identified immunotherapy drugs administered between biopsy and surgery. So the resource I'm talking about is there's an ontology or website called hemoc.org, which is run by Jeremy Warner at Brown. It's an open source project where basically they're curating every oncology drug regimen connected to the indication or the disease site that it has been approved for and or studied under. And so we had this loaded into the EDW. And so now it basically, when a doctor comes to us and says, oh, I want all immunotherapy, or I want all targeted therapy, or I want all for breast cancer patients or for colorectal cancer or whatever. Instead of asking them for that list of drugs, we query this and we get the list from this ontology. We send it to the doctor to make sure that they're okay with it, or the researcher, but it makes it easier to basically have that communication. So, and then we basically, after we got that list of drugs, we query the administered immunotherapy drugs from the EDW oncology drug data mart that is sourced from EPIC treatment episodes. So in this case, it's very easy to basically, you got your biopsy date, you have your surgery date, then you look at this data mart, you find the drugs of interest, you basically find whether or not it was administered between, those dates. Next challenge, now we're getting into the actual, the data points, not the cohorts. So in this case, we wanted to generate HIPAA compliant geocode. So in this case, we want to use an on-premise HIPAA compliant geocode. And we basically have used, I would prefer that this is done uniformly within the EDW across the board, and that they create a geocoded address data mart that's connected to every single historical EPIC patient address, and or their addresses collected in things like the tumor registry. But in this case, we haven't yet convinced the data architects to do that, but that's something we want to do. And so in this case, we use this off-premise thing, which is eventually what they're probably going to be doing in the centralized EDW anyways. Data point challenge is basically getting the site and the site of metastasis. So this is part of the bad 80%. So metastasis declarations are often declared on imaging exam reports or clinic progress notes, or possibly surgical pathology reports on biopsies or surgeries performed on the site of metastasis. There are ICD-10 codes for secondary neoplasms, but they only encode where the cancer has traveled to and not from where. And this is just a link to those ICD-10 codes. So our solution here was to use regular expressions in NLP to extract metastatic declarations from subsequent pathology reports, and to use ICD-10 secondary neoplasm codes in the EDW diagnosis part as a surrogate for definitive discrete metastatic declarations. And then we have to validate with some human curation. Next challenge is radiation therapy treatments. So we want to map the radiation therapy technique and modality to a standard. And there's one from Astro, which is called the minimum data elements for radiation oncology. NM's Mosaic Radiation Oncology EMR it does a really good job of discretely capturing radiation therapy treatment events, anatomic target, begin date, end date, planned fractions, planned dose, fractions, and dose per fraction. Those are all discretely captured inside the Mosaic system and then loaded into a radiation data mart. And so that's really great. So it's very easy to get that data. But the actual type of radiation therapy, for whatever reason, is not discrete, and it's free-form text. So we have to manually map those free text entries for technique and modality to these Astro standard concepts. I would love for this to change at the point of care, because it would make using radiation therapy data a lot easier. Next data point challenge is systemic regimens. So we want to derive systemic regimen lines of therapy and treatment changes for breast cancer from EPIC beacon treatment episodes, which are great because they kind of just lay it out there for you in the EDW oncology drug data mart. But then also there's administered medications that sometimes happen outside of Epic Beacon, and then those are orders that are not part of the treatment episodes. So, and changes in the lines of therapy are often are often prompted by recurrence and progression events. So our solution here was to basically query the administered systemic regimens from the data mart source from the Epic Beacon treatment episodes. We used, again, hemonc.org to find the drug regimens and drugs relevant to breast cancer to be able to look for the medication orders that are outside of the Epic treatment. And then we use windowing logic to try to determine when a treatment that's outside of Epic Beacon has ended or begun. So, next challenge is finding all variants identified by NGS testing. So NM has historically used a lot of different vendors for NGS testing: Guardant, Foundation One, Tempus, Caris, the in-house molecular pathology department, and there's actually many others, or not many others, but there's some others. So some of those vendors, Foundation, Guardant, and Tempus, sent XML and JSON formats to basically describe in discrete representations of those variants that are in PDF reports clinically to NM, and those have been loaded in EDW, and that was a sort of a side system that was basically running parallel to the clinical workflow that was getting all this data discretely and was loading in EDW. It was embargoed for about 8 months, but it's just been recently been unembargoed. So now it's available in the EDW for querying. So we basically have discrete data within the EDW for those 3 vendors from like 2016 to April of 2023 or something like that. Since then, for those vendors, we have not received any data, but recently, Guardant, the NM has basically implemented the Aura interface, which is interface of ordering genomic data between Epic and different vendors. And so discrete data for Guardant is now flowing into Clarity inside Epic, which is great news. Unfortunately, there is one problem, is that it is currently only being done for FDA-approved variants for the indication. And we're working with NM to try to have them fix that. There's also the in-house molecular pathology department. They have a database called Genome Oncology, which has been loaded into the DW, and that is now available for querying as well. And that for the different diseases, that's like myeloid, or actually, I think all heme neoplasms, I think pretty much order that, lung, sarcoma, and a couple other different areas. So, so basically, NM has not basically mapped those representations of variants across all those vendors. We basically just have the way that the vendors have expressed it across time. It would be great to normalize those into one representation, but we don't have that yet. So right now, basically, the solution is to basically just to release the data as reported by the vendors. But at least we have this data across these different vendors across time now. Next data point challenge is getting the death date and follow-up date. So we basically want to find the last follow-up date or the death date of a patient. So we identify a list of encounter types within the EHR that provide high evidence of continued survival. We integrate follow-up tracking from the tumor registry, which is mandated to do a level of tracking, which is not done within the EHR. And we do the same thing for death date. And then we integrate those 2 sources. I would love for us to load the Social Security Administration Death Index into the EDW. It was there a long time ago, and it stopped for different like legal reasons. But there's no reason why it couldn't be again, and that would be a really great resource. So yeah, so that kind of like ends the description of that specific example and like the challenges and how we meet them. And gives you a little bit of flavor for like, how to deal with data in the EDW. But not every project will be able to be satisfied with clinical data exported from the EDW. Sometimes that 80% will need to be manually curated by a data coordinator for a project. So in situations, the study will need to ask for an EDW exception. And there's a process to do that. And so basically the language is when data is not available in the EDW, an exception to review those records directly may be granted on a study-by-study basis. So, and then basically If that's done, and QDIS will help investigators we will set up a REDCap project to help investigators manually extract data alongside the data that we can import from the EDW and Notice. We would like to definitely work with people to try to make the EDW better so that we don't have to do this as much. So QDIS Clinical Informatics research analysts can help with instrument design, survey setup, e-consent setup, maintenance and integration with Notice and EDW. We've created some disease-specific REDCap project templates that cover fundamental oncology data points so that not everybody, hopefully, who does a breast cancer or a different type of cancer REDCap project is starting from ground zero. Those templates ease integration with EDW because the logic does not need to be customized for each REDCap project. And we want to collaborate with more investigators to validate the utility and the clinical validity of these site-specific project templates. The REDCap project template can be integrated with PathCore biorepositories as well. And we are in the process of getting the BSI2 PathCore system. That's the system that PathCore uses to manage their specimens. We're getting that loaded into the EDW so that we can more easily integrate querying PathCore biorepository with clinical data, whether it's from REDCap or whether from the EDW itself, because REDCap itself is actually loaded into the EDW as well. This is just an example of the lung cancer project that we have. We basically see like the different instruments. You'll see that there's kind of this repeated pattern of things that are not manual and things that are manual. The idea is that if you want to try to capture all systemic treatments, not all ones that are not necessarily done here at Northwestern Medicine, we can pull the ones in from Northwestern Medicine, but if you want to try to curate the other ones, you'll have to manually do that. Same thing with radiation treatments. And then we also have like a disease status instrument, which tries to track a real world progression over time. So now talk a little bit about the current inventory of data assets in the EDW at a very like general level. I did this a little bit as I was talking about that specific example. So I'm just going to hit each one of these. So, demographics is fairly decent within, obviously, it could be better as far as what kind of profiling of our patients, and hopefully there will be different efforts at the point of care and the point of registration to make that better, but it's only as good as what's get collected. Social determinants of health are not really structured. They're structured in Epic Clarity, and they're fairly decent to work with, but it would be great if we had a data mart that would organize it across time. I talked about this before. There is no sort of geocode information inside the EDW. It would be great if it was done once for all addresses across patients instead of doing it ad hoc per research project. Labs are discrete and very well easy to work with. Pathology, we talked a little bit about, but we've created a pathology data mart within the EDW, which makes it a lot easier to query and across different pathology systems over time. And we have incorporated the synoptic pathology data from the CAP checklists, which has been great. There are some things that need to be fixed. There's some missing pathology cases that are not in the pathology data mart because we weren't replicating the very, very specific odd logic that Epic uses to display pathology reports on the pathology tab, but we're in the process of fixing that. There are some duplicate accession numbers, which we're in the process of fixing as well. There's also some bad formatting issues inside the pathology data mart. And actually there's in Clarity in general, where a lot of the formatting gets lost and you have no line breaks. So it's just this long, giant string of text, which is very hard for a human or NLP to work with. And I would love that to get fixed as well. That it doesn't affect everything, but it affects certain things. Like, for example, microscopic descriptions on bone marrow reports. And we don't have an imaging exam data mart. What time am I at? 1:40, okay. We have a pathology data mart. We don't have an image exam data mart. I would love that we would have one that would basically type our imaging exams more in an easy manner, and also connect them to the connect them to the textual reports. You can get that data, and it's not that hard to get, but it could be optimized greatly. Also, I would love if the radiologists would take a cue from the pathologists and start using some of that synoptic, because there is an emerging synoptic data for imaging, and I would love that they start doing that as well, because it would then make everybody's life a lot easier. Drug treatment data is being done inside Epic Beacon, and it's fairly easy to query, and with the hemonc.org, it's very easy to identify drug treatments. Talked about radiation treatments and the shortcomings there, but in general, it's actually very easy to work with as well. And we have a surgery data mart, which does a good job of capturing surgeries. There is no high-level ontology of oncology surgeries, so if you just want to find all different types of first-line oncology surgery for head and neck cancer, it's not like a simple thing. You have to custom craft different lists of CPT codes, and it would be great if there was such a vocabulary, and we're hoping to participate in some efforts to do that. Disease status, progression, recurrence, and metastasis is almost non-existent, I would say. There's a very small amount of data that basically would need to be manually curated, or it would need to be abstracted or by NLP or by different techniques. Yeah, so that's one area that would be great to change, both at the point of care and then also doing retrospective. Same thing for things like performance status. That's something we have some discrete data within flow sheets, and that's easy to carry to, but it's often documented as in clinic progress notes. It would be really easy, because it's a very easily extractable data item, to do once across the board, but that's something it's a missing data mart that we would have, that I would love to have. Survival is fairly decently attainable within the EDW, but it's only as good as people's ability to show up. And then here we get some bad areas. So we basically have nearly no discrete germline variant data at all. We actually don't have any. We do have the germline variants that got called on somatic panels, and so we can at least query it that way. But we've just been looking at the actual genetic counseling reports that are done for germline testing, and they look pretty amenable to extraction. So I think it would be a great thing to do a retrospective processing of all genetic testing reports to get a germline variant database, and I think it would be something that would be pretty obtainable. Somatic variants, I talked about. There's some gaps from 2023 April on, and the process of the new vendors is coming on board, but it's coming on slowly. And I would really encourage everybody as much as possible to voice their opinions to NM, that like for clinical care and for research, this is really important that we get this data discreetly. Tumor registry, we are like ahead of the game. Actually, a lot of places don't have their tumor registry loaded into their EDW or for whatever reason, but they have different struggles with different vendors. But the fact that we have our tumor registry within our EDW and that we can query it and we can supplement the data that's not discrete is really good. NM could do a better job of getting data from Epic and all those different clinical systems into the tumor registry so that they could have their data more quickly available within the EDW, but that's something that's ongoing. So future directions and a call for collaboration. So Dr. Ashley Ross in urology has had great success in creating a site-specific data marts within the EDW. This effort has been fueled by funding a dedicated research analyst, a research data architect, and guidance from Dr. Ross's team as a clinical champion and domain expert. These site-specific data marts make the querying of prostate cancer data much more streamlined than any other disease area, for sure. So urology's decision to take an EDW first approach has enabled the creation of data mart across all NM patients. So they don't necessarily create a biorepository, consent patients, take the data out of the EDW, put it somewhere else, and then curate the data there. They're basically doing it all on all patients within, and it's only as good as your ability to organize data within the EDW. But for their disease area, they've had very good luck in creating structures within EDW to optimize and be able to do it on all patients, because when you're taking it out of EDW, I'm sorry, when you're taking it out of NM space, now you need to have like a research study to be able to do that. But if you're doing it within NM space, you don't have to. So we would like to replicate this model to other disease areas, and we're seeking investigators to fulfill that clinical champion role that Dr. Ross has done for urology and try to replicate that. And so these are just some informatics collaborations that my group has participated in to try to make our job easier, and also try to make the use of data at Northwestern better. So I've talked about hemonc.org a lot. We've been basically trying to work with Jeremy to make it easy, like have better connections to disease sites, so that it would be easier to query by the codes that we actually have in our tumor registry inside the medical record coming from synoptic pathology. Charles Mayo and Ying Zhao at the University of Pennsylvania, they basically have something called the O3 initiative, which is it's a ontology trying to represent radiation therapy. And so they have that high-level radiation treatment ontology that basically is based on Astros, the one that I had previously. And they're in the process of connecting those radiation therapy high-level codes to low-level procedure codes, things that are done like on CPT codes, so that it would be able to connect those two together. And then also we've been working with Scott Campbell at the University of Nebraska to help validate the utility of binding CAP ECP encoded data, basic synoptic pathology data, to a SNOMED ontology. Right now, when we query CAP synoptic data, we have to have these ridiculous long ins clauses of the different identifiers from CAP and or strings. And so if we had it bound to a SNOMED ontology, it would be a lot easier to query, because we could do hierarchical queries that say, give me everything that's been mapped to this concept or its descendants. So yeah, and that's it. So yeah, definitely like to take questions. Hey.
I'm just wondering, what are people actually using the data for? When they access it, are they using it for pilot, clinical work, research? Have they published on it? Any idea?
Yeah, I mean, it's all those things. You know, some people are doing, just pilot projects. Some people are doing biorepositories, and they're then like setting up like for the release of those data and the specimens to investigators who then are publishing on them. So yeah, really it's just kind of across the board.
And a really good question. People who have applied for access to it, do you have any record as to how many of those actually generate something? Or do you ever go back to find what their experience was with the data, if they didn't do anything with it, what their issues were?
No, like I said, we're still kind of new, and we definitely want to do that. So that's part of our roadmap of things that we want to do, is basically reach out to people to figure out, like, did we do a good job? Like, and what was the results of what you produced? So we do that kind of as part of QDisc generally. So anytime we have this QDisc tracker, anybody's in there, we reach out to them anyways. So like us being part of that is happening, but I would like it to do it on a more like actual like informatics level, like directly with investigators. So yeah.
It's about AI or
So we have done some, we haven't done really machine learning. We've done natural language processing on some of the data. There's an investigator in the Kellogg School of Business, Will Thompson, who we've been collaborating with, and he's developed an NLP package that we use like generically for almost all of our tasks. There is not a good text analytics infrastructure in the EDW currently. So one of the big problems right now is that in order to apply NLP or machine learning or on data from the EDW, there's not an easy way to necessarily pull it out and then put it back in to use for future cases. So I'm really trying to push the EDW and NM to make that available, because I think it's great for people to like pull the data out, run whatever they want to do, and then sort of like hoard the results themselves. But it would be much more, it would be much stronger if basically we had like a sort of a governance process that said, okay, this is how you get the data. This is where you put it. You have a process to generate outputs. We have some sort of vetted process for figuring out, what techniques that you did. And then you put the results out, and they have metadata that connects and it describes those outputs and describes the techniques and who is responsible for doing them. I would really like us to be able to do that. Right now, we have basically where we're pulling data out on an ad hoc basis, and we are generating NLP outputs, and then we are putting them back in. But it's a very manual and not automated process, and that's what I would really love for the EDW, for research to do, and I would love them to basically do it in a systematic, like across the board way as well. So like do it for all imaging exam reports, all pathology reports, and do it once and do it right.